If I had a crystal ball and I could look into this crystal ball and tell you guys exactly where your business opportunities lie looking forward, what is working in the future, what is not working in the future, things that we should totally eliminate, things that we should totally start doing in order to see your business grow and flourish. Imagine how amazing that would be. Guys, I don't have a crystal ball, but I do have the next best thing. We've recently just launched our opportunity analysis, and the entire premise of this exercise is to help you guys understand where the holes in your bucket currently lie. Why is that important? Because we don't want to start filling a bucket that's leaking. Guys, for a limited time only, I'm going to be offering this as a free giveaway. It's $350, but for you site shedders, you're going to get it for free. You need to head across to tradie.wiki/grow and enter the code SiteShed to get it for nothing. Off the back of it, book a time to have a chat and we'll see where it takes us. We're looking forward to helping you and seeing where your opportunities lie. Today's podcast has been proudly brought to you by Tradie Web Guys. Tradie Web Guys work with tradespeople only on their websites and marketing solutions to help them stand out from their competition. Everything from web design through to SEO, search engine marketing, content creation, you name it, guys. It is a customized solution for trade-based organizations and it's fantastic. Head across to tradiewebguys.com.au/apply, fill in the form and let's have a conversation.
Giving tradies and contractors around the globe the tools to run a modern business. You're listening to Toolbox Talks from the Site Shed. Now here's your host, Matt Jones.
Michael, welcome back to the Site Shed podcast.
Hi, Matt. Delighted to be on it again. Nice to see you.
Good to have you, mate. So we've come back today to chat about, well, I suppose the last few podcasts that we've done I've been talking about this report that you guys over at Tradify have been running, the Pulse report. The first episode for you guys out there was episode 271. The next episode was 289, and essentially we were, well, actually, why don't you give us a bit of background as this report, because it was really some great insight. In the wake of COVID.
Absolutely. So it was probably shortly after COVID kicked off. It feels like a long time ago now, in 2020. We just wanted to get a handle on, what's the level of impact on our customers and on the industry as a whole. So we sort of did a survey of Tradify customers and non-Tradify customers actually across sort of Australia, New Zealand and the UK, just to get a sense of how they're feeling and the impact it had on their business. And from that, we drew out some themes around the things that most of the sort of tradie companies were seeing. And then we just said, actually, we got lots of great feedback around this and decided to sort of look at it as a cyclical thing. But it wasn't actually just about COVID anymore. It was more about what's the health of trades businesses as a whole, what's the opportunities, challenges, that type of thing. And so, we just released our, I want to say, third Pulse report for Australia. It's just come out now.
Yeah, interesting. So I suppose in this episode, we'll probably end up drawing some comparisons between the last report and this current one. Tell me, what's the general sentiment and feel that you guys are experiencing with trade businesses from the different markets that you operate in, which is Australia, New Zealand, the UK? Where else are you guys? Is it?
We're US. We've got customers in South Africa, pretty much all over the place.
Sure.
But I'll focus more heavily on sort of Australia for the purposes of this and comparisons, some of the comparisons. So one thing I would say, the overall sentiment is still positive, right? So 64% of Australian trade businesses still think things will improve, which is really good. That said, we have seen an increase in the percentage of people that think it will worsen. So if you look at the numbers, going back a while, and it's not huge, but it's jumped up a few points. So 8% versus 4%. So 8% of trades businesses in Australia think things will get worse. Whereas when we spoke last time on the last report, it was about 4%. So that is a bit of an increase.
What defines better or worse?
Well, it's kind of subjective, right? The question we're really asking is, do you think business conditions will improve, stay the same, or get worse? That's really the open-ended question they need to answer. And the vast majority, you can see from those numbers, right? The vast majority, 92%, will think it will stay the same or get better. Sure. But there is this 8% that think it will get worse. And what's interesting when you dig into those numbers for Australia is actually there are regional differences. So South Australia is considerably more pessimistic than, say, Victoria or New South Wales. So there is quite a big difference there. 13% of South Australia think it will get worse. Whereas you look at Victoria is about 10%, so slightly above the average, but actually New South Wales is about 5%. So, there's a lot of other underlying drivers to this, but it's interesting when you look at the condition of, where COVID's at in different states, the impact that can have on people's sentiment, and that moment in time when we asked that question.
And were you able to get any data out of Western Australia, or did the governor prevent it?
No, we got some. I think it was broadly in line. So the only one that really stood out was sort of the Southern Australia, and then, like I say, New South Wales. Victoria slightly worse, which in some ways isn't that surprising, but broadly in line with average. But you look at New South Wales, it's 77% actually think it will improve. So much more positive sentiment.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's the general, I suppose, feel that we get. I feel like the focuses shift a little bit from, like, like when we last spoke, people were like afraid of COVID. They were worried about getting it. They were worried about preventing people from getting it. And I feel like the sentiment's now shifted towards, well, we're all going to get it anyway eventually. And like anyone, as I said to you offline before, pretty much everyone I know that's in Sydney's either had it or has got it. And so I feel like, and then everyone that's sort of got it's like, well, it's actually not that bad anyway. And so the focus to me seems like it's shifted from, oh my God, we've got to stop ourselves from getting it, to the realization that eventually we're going to get it anyway. And like, how do we facilitate, or how do we implement process, in the wake of absent staff, this ongoing lack of being able to get testing equipment, these rat tests and all this kind of stuff. Like, that sort of seems to be the focus now. So the conversations that are popping up in our group, and I'm like, it's interesting. You see that?
Yeah. I think it's there's a couple of things. One which is interesting is there is quite a big difference depending on the age of the business. So what we did see is if you've been in business for more than 10 years, you tended to be slightly more pessimistic. And I don't know, if you're in business for less than a year, you were very optimistic. And like, you can read that a couple of ways, right? If you just launched a business, then you want to be optimistic, whether you, whether things are great or not, because you've just literally started off and you've done that for a good reason. And we've seen quite a few trade businesses start up in the last couple of years, but they are a lot more optimistic. 82% of businesses that are less than a year old feel that things will get better. Whereas if you look at, the older kind of businesses, the ones that are more established, they think, it's like 13%, quite a bit above the average, actually think things will get worse. And, I don't know if that's generational, I don't know if that's businesses that have just been around a lot longer, that maybe experienced the global financial crisis and saw some of the ramifications of that afterwards. But there is definitely a difference in perspective based on kind of business longevity.
That's interesting, because you tend to think, businesses that have been around a while have sort of got a bit more like perspective on navigating these sort of crises, or they have that mentality around like never waste a crisis, It's like we got a lot of clients that have been around for a long time, and they're like, no, it's been fine for us. It's been able us to improve some of our processes and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, you would think so. So whether in reality it plays out that way for those more established businesses, probably not. But it's just more probably some level of experience that says, we've been through this kind of mini boom for trades companies, right, in the last couple of years. But if there are macroeconomic changes, does that have an impact that we haven't necessarily foreseen yet? And that probably is underlying some of that possible pessimism. But in the scheme of things, right, the other thing I would say, we are dealing with, still overly positive, optimistic forecasts when you look at this, right? It's still north of, 2/3 of the base, still thinking things will get better or at least stay the same. And staying the same, right, is actually quite good for most businesses. For most trades businesses that are doing pretty well right now, and staying the same is actually still very, very positive.
Sure. I know in the report you touched on like growth and like goals and things like that for the businesses. Is there, I know for like a lot of businesses, there's things that are seemingly out of their hands in the space of, sourcing material and, that kind of stuff. Did that come into the equation at all when you're running this report this time around?
Yeah, I actually think that probably had some level of impact on some of these results. So there's two things that sort of came out that we started to look at. One was supply chain issues and material shortage. Definitely an issue for Australian trades businesses. I mean, anyone that's listening or watching this will appreciate that and have experienced it. So I think there's an awareness, there's a way that many trades businesses are changing how they approach ordering ahead, how they approach billing their customers to account for that material shortage. So that's definitely an issue. The other one we touched on was tool theft. So we'd heard this sort of on and off now for a couple of years. It's been an issue for tradies, and everyone's familiar with it, and maybe it's happened to them. But we see in Australia, slightly lower than the UK, but still quite high. 16% of people surveyed have experienced tool theft in the last year. So that's still one of those things that as an industry is a big issue. And it obviously can have a pretty big impact if you're not insured appropriately, or you can't get to the job you're supposed to do. So that again has an impact. So there were two themes that sort of seem to come through, but material shortage is probably the biggest one that I think, depending on the sector you're in, still has a pretty big impact.
It's probably a kind of a hard thing to report on as well, but I know I've had some conversations with a lot of sort of tier 1, tier 2 building and project management sort of organizations who are saying that they've experienced so much financial impact on things like liquefied damages, like not getting projects done on time due to, things like material shortage or staff being away or whatever it might be, lockdowns. And of course, like on those huge, big projects not having that built into their contracts initially, and some of these contracts are going on for 3, 4, 5 years, it was well before COVID was even a thing. Yeah. And all of a sudden they're getting slammed with these LDs. I mean, I know, like, poor little rich kid sort of situation, but like the reality is like that there's a ripple effect there, which, I mean, obviously, those LDs get passed on, like, so I think now there's like people are a little bit more conscious with, having these causes built into their contracts and sort of trying to mitigate that risk looking forward.
I think there's a whole different way of framing how you do the business. Like, two of the themes that came through this year that people are focused on is growth and profitability. Interestingly, growth because people are want to consolidate and make sure that if things do change in the next couple of years, they have a really good baseline set of new customers coming through, and they can just keep maintaining the business and their growth. Profitability, some of that I think is driven by supply chain issues because if you've not ordered supplies or you've ordered them in advance, but you haven't part build in advance or things like that. That has a huge impact on your bottom line as a trades business. Or if you start a job and you can't finish it for 2 months out because materials haven't turned up, again, there's a really big impact. So I do think a lot of trades companies are really looking at how they actually kind of create their process of when they order, how they charge customers, but also, to your point, how they actually define those contracts with customers so they don't get caught out by not being able to get supplies.
It certainly makes me wonder what the goals were previously if growth and profitability wasn't flying the flag back then.
I think the other theme that comes through, in fairness, is still really around efficiency and work-life balance. Still shines through. So if you think about, we've spoken about this before. For a lot of trade companies, they actually have more than enough work. They're quite happy with the level of work they have, and they're not looking to. Not all of them want to expand. They might be sole traders. They may have 2 or 3 employees.
Sure.
And they don't necessarily want to expand. They're like, look, I've created a lifestyle which works for me. I don't want to get extra work. So growth is. So I think when you think growth, that you think marketing and advertising and trying to drum up new business. They're not necessarily thinking in that way because they have a really decent pipeline of opportunity. It's interesting that it's come up a bit more this survey, and I think that is driven by some level of fear around. Well, okay, if some of my customers can't be customers due to their own economic conditions, then where's the next customer going to come from? And so just an awareness that they probably need to start thinking about that a bit more and marketing their business in the right way.
Yeah, we've definitely noticed a trend in, like clients that come to us over at Tradie Web Guys, where they're after, if not more like growth in the space of more like new clients, certainly growth in the space of being more proactive in looking professional, showcasing their work better, implementing technology, growing the process side of the business to improve profitability or efficiency, or perhaps as well, just even increasing their repeat business and, getting back in the face of their existing customers better, and not always trying to, ram sales down their throat, like educate. Like I think a lot of the guys, the penny's sort of dropping where, we are actually in the information age here and people are interested in what we do. They don't necessarily just want to be sent promotions every 10 minutes. So
no, I think there is one of the common topics is around your web presence and the look and the professionalism of the company, which does make a really big difference. Certainly when you want to get repeat business or, attract future customers. And so from the survey, we saw that, about 50-50 actually almost. The 2 biggest channels that are most important to trades companies tend to be social media and website. Not that surprising. Google's still only around 13%, I think, off the top of my head, in terms of Google ads. So people are doing less of the proactive stuff, but actually having a local, whether it's a Facebook business page and a website, probably still the most important things to do. And they feel like, I think for most trades companies, that's becoming a kind of hygiene factor. To make sure you can compete and be seen as professional and all the other stuff that goes with that.
Well, and the thing is, realistically, like now with that whole workforce, a much larger percentage of the workforce, that are working from home, they're in front of their computers every day. They're on their phones, they're not out there meeting people at networking events. They're not out there, so everything now is online. And if you're not there, you're pretty much MySpace.
Well, and even if someone gets a word of mouth recommendation from a neighbour, the first thing most people will do, to your point, if they're working from home in the office, they'll jump on their phone, look at the Facebook page or the website, and that's where they're going to really either reinforce the great opinion they've already had, or look at it and go, oh, I don't know about this. Is this really a legit company? They haven't got a website, So I think there is something in that, rightly or wrongly. So I think it's become a thing that people are aware of, and there's just a better way to manage kind of online lead generation and do that in an efficient way that doesn't, have you sitting there making loads of phone calls, all the things that go with that, which is what would have happened, years ago.
Interestingly, it's sort of, I should say more frustratingly, because I've been trying to ram this stuff down our client's throat for so long, and then all of a sudden, it's it's become more and more apparent. But most of these businesses, and legitimately most of the businesses we work with, they don't necessarily have a lead problem. They have a retention problem. So the shift for them, the paradigm for them, which again, I've just been trying to slam down their throats for so long, but now we're trying to say to them, listen, just get better at telling your story and focus more on the conversion side of the traffic you're already getting instead of trying to generate more traffic, because you have enough leads. You've got a shitty process around converting them, right? So that's kind of good and bad. It's good because it means that they don't necessarily have to invest in things like Google Ads and all these kind of means that they might have done in the past to generate new leads and have that churn and burn mentality. It's bad in the sense that it's made them realize that they have to implement change, and of course, change is uncomfortable, right? So,
well, it's the hard. One of our biggest recommendations out of this report, and it's actually similar to the previous recommendations in many ways because it's still the issue. There's sort of two things. One is consolidate your systems and start to get more efficient at how you manage stuff. And one big part of that is online lead generation. So there are systems that can make that very easy for you. So you don't need to have people phoning up, and that does it in a professional way. So the end customer who's made that inquiry gets an answer as quickly as possible, even if they're not the right fit. They might be the right fit in the future, but they might not be the right fit today for you as a business. And the other thing is, part of that online lead inquiry process is how quickly you can quote. So speed to quote is still a really, really, how quickly you can get an estimate to a customer is still really, really important. And, we will, obviously we'll talk about that a lot because it's our business is trying to help people do that in an efficient way, but there's other businesses like us that do that. But actually that is becoming more important, right? So there's the initial visibility of your business, then you go to a customer's site, and then the speed and professionalism with which you get back to that customer. That will become more important. So if there is a recession, frankly, you're going to be the businesses that will thrive and survive in those periods because people are going to go for the ones that are credible, quick, responsive, and all those types of things.
Yeah, I mean, and there's so many serendipities that come into play with that sort of having those processes implemented. But I mean, you've got your first impressions, and then you've got your first experience, right? And the first impression is very often, well, if someone gives you a referral, you jump on your phone and you look at them and you go, oh, okay, they're actually a legit business. Cool. They've got a website. Here's some projects they've done or whatever it might be, right? And that first experience is kind of what you're talking about. Like if you reach out to that person, then what does that experience look like? Like, are they, so, I mean, I've said this a couple of times on the show, like in this, a few months back, I had two electricians come out, two different companies come out for two different things. One of them was just to run some data cabling in the house here. A couple of guys were here for like half a day running some different places around for the office setup and whatever. And then a couple of weeks later, I had another guy come out who was, replacing halogen lights for LED lights and that sort of stuff. Now, the first guys that came out, they were here for, half a day, and it literally took them 2 months to send me an invoice, which was in total for like $700 or something. It wasn't a lot of money. And I was just thinking, the whole time they'd forgotten about me. And and I'm like, I really want to email them and ask them for the invoice, but then I also want to see, like, if I don't email, like, how long this is going to take, just so I've got some reference. Because then the guy that came out 2 weeks later, young guy, really, really professional. He was in and out. He did his on-site audit. He had his iPad there. Ran through the whole checklist, safety checklist, all that kind of stuff. Did the job in and out within an hour or two. Paid him through his iPad, like just in and out. And I'm like, wow, what a chalk and cheese experience. The other guy still had not invoiced me, and at that point had not yet for another month. Like it was just insane. I was like, what is going on here? By the time that invoice came through, I'd forgotten about it.
It's not that uncommon. You think from a cash flow perspective, it's not great for that business. And so that's still a really, really big issue. And one of the biggest, one of the other common themes that came through the survey is that, most trades companies are still spending an inordinate amount of time on admin.
Sure.
And the example you're giving there is probably someone that's predominantly using pen and paper to run their business or some other sort of inferior system. Well, at least I hope so. But it sounds a bit...
You know what? Ironically, they weren't. Because I asked them on the job, I said, what are you guys running? I think from memory, they were running using Tradify, but the guys out in the field weren't trained on how to create the invoices.
Create the invoice and the quote there and then, yeah.
So I'm guessing they still had some job card system or whatever it was where they document it, and once every quarter or whatever, the director or whatever would sit down and do all the invoices in one hit, which is just insane. It sort of defies the point of using the technology in the first place.
Well, that's kind of what we talk about, speed of quote and speed of invoice, because you've created the quote. Yep, there might be some changes in material costs and the amount of time it took and all those things. So by the time you get to the invoice, it's very easy to update those because they're all within the app, and then just send the invoice on the spot. And actually, for many of the companies that use Tradify, they're taking payment there and then as well, right? And
sure.
So it's and there's no reason not to. And most end customers are totally cool with that. I mean, your experience is a good one. Is you want to know what you're going to spend and you paid that money, and you don't want to get the surprise in 2 months that suddenly you're like, oh, I've forgotten about that. Now I need to pay this $700. So it's a big theme, but we saw through the survey the average number of hours is still kind of around 18 hours. People are spending on admin tasks a week. About 34% of the surveyed base still using pen and paper. So there is still this massive opportunity for a lot of companies to really, like say, consolidate their systems and really sort of solve some of these big issues. Interestingly, we've talked about this before. I don't really understand why, but plumbers and heating engineers still spending way longer in admin. I don't know why that is. Sort of around 23 hours versus the sort of average of 18 is the other sort of interesting trend that came through the report. But still a massissive opportunity to just get systems on board that can, carry the weight of most of this stuff and get those hours down, because that's a lot of time, right? Over a week, it's a huge amount of time.
I mean, I guess there's like with that, in certain verticals are probably a little bit more subjected to like additional compliance, So perhaps with like plumbing, for example, like they've got things that you can't run through an app. They've got to create their certificate of compliance every time they touch gas or they touch drainage or whatever it is. So there's things that they can't necessarily
that's part of it.
run through an app, which may add to it.
We've started adding a load of compliance forms in the app for that reason, because that's, I think, one of the things that we saw. Markets like the UK, there's a compliance form for everyone. It's not state-based, so that makes it somewhat easier. But that's the thing we'd be looking at, because again, I agree with you. That's a level of friction that just is another thing that needs to be filled in, right? Which can't necessarily be solved for by an app. If it's a state-led thing, you have to use a state website and all those types of things. But that's probably driving some of that for sure.
So what else has come out of this report?
Well, the other big one, the other thing that I would mention is probably back to hiring is still really, really important, right? So, you can see from the report that 58% of Australian trade companies intend on hiring someone over the next year. And what I found interesting was when the Australian government sort of launched that initial big support fund to hire apprentices and fund that money got spent. I'm trying to think in my head. I think it was kind of in less than 5 months. I think they hit their sort of $1 billion target and had to relaunch another 1.2 billion into that effort, which is a really good sign, right? And I think one of the things the industry has to grapple with is getting more apprenticeships and getting more people into the industry to sort of tackle this big gap in the workforce. So that's another trend that comes through, that people still predominantly want to hire. Most trades companies have hired in the last year and want to keep hiring. I think that's a really positive thing. The issue is like, can you get people into the industry fast enough, especially with borders closed and all the other stuff that goes with that.
I mean, it's both a problem and it's a problem on a number of different levels. And like over the years, I've seen this change form in many different ways. But when I did my plumbing apprenticeship, it was a pretty comprehensive training at TAFE, which if you guys aren't familiar, it's like a technical college, and you have to do that in order to get your apprenticeship done. And then if you want to go on from there, that's where you get your license. From start to finish, a 6-year process. By the time you do your 4-year apprenticeship, 5-year process, by the time you do your 4-year apprenticeship and you go and do your licensing course and that kind of stuff. So it was a lot of training. And, back then we would take the piss out of it and say how relevant it is. But the reality was it was a really, really comprehensive and excellent program. And of course, there are things that weren't in that course, which one of the reasons I have a podcast is because like there wasn't really any emphasis on how to learn how to run a business. It's just sort of do your trade, off you go start a business, which is ridiculous. Yeah. But like you can only fit so much into a government funded curriculum. And back then it was government funded. So, I think it might have cost the employer like, $400 a year or something just ridiculously cheap, in order to do that. But then they went down this whole route of, sort of privatizing it, which meant all the fees went up, and then they got rid of that because people weren't doing apprenticeships. And then they thought, okay, we need more people doing apprenticeships. So in our infinite wisdom, we'll reduce and remove some of the training modules within. So then you've got a whole bunch of people out there that have got these qualifications without experience and could just turn into this shitstorm. So I think it's like this they're looking for the formula. I mean, in reality, the formula we had back then was great if you're looking at people that have the qualifications and experience, but then the people that are looking to hire people and they need employees, so then it makes it harder because there's less people that are qualified, blah, blah. So there's like this systemic issue, which they can't seem to find the right formula to. I mean, staffing is like, in truth, it's the number one issue that like we see across the globe, and it always has been, and I imagine it always will be.
I think it starts at school. I think there's a bigger fundamental issue, which is positioning the trades as a really great career to get into versus, one of the common themes I've heard actually in every country is historically it was, you went into the trades if you weren't academic was this perception, which shouldn't necessarily be the case, right? You get into the trades because you might be 16 and not have any idea what you want to do. You may not want to go to college or university, whatever it is. You may decide actually I want to go and get a job and build a business, right? And that's what people are doing, is building these great businesses via trade. So I think telling that story, and I'm starting to see more of that start to happen now with credible trades that are very active on social media, telling their story about how they create this lifestyle that enables all this other stuff they can do and work on their terms. Mm-hmm. I think that's the grassroots stuff that needs to happen that will get more people wanting to go through those apprenticeships, wanting to go through TAFE and all the things that go with that. So that's probably the bigger issue.
So I don't know if I've spoken to you about this, but like many years ago when before I had the podcast, I newly had the agency set up, and I was doing a lot of education with the Department of Education, and we were sitting at some of their roundtable events, and I was sort of representing the trades. Everyone else in the room had like a .gov.edu email address except me. But they were saying back then, and mind you, this is 10 years ago, but I realized that. I mean, I was in that boat, right? I was the non-academic kid. Like I never really considered myself stupid, although many would, but I was never, I was never academic. Like I pretty much sucked at school, had very serious concentration issues, so on and so forth. So I went into a trade basically because that was like the only option, essentially, or the only option that really appealed to me. It was either that or do something like an arts degree in uni, which I had no interest really in doing. So I always wanted to do something with my hands anyway, so it worked out quite well. But the point being, it was even back then, it was sort of like, well, you're not academic, so you might as well go to a trade. Sort of that sort of mentality. Interestingly, one of the biggest problems which came out of one of these roundtable events that we had down in Canberra was systemic. It came from the parents, and you live in this environment where you've got your grandfather went to a private school, your dad went to the same private school, you went to that private school. You're not doing a friggin' trade if you went to this school, because we don't do trades here. You're going to be an accountant or whatever it might be, right? Yeah. And so there are these kids that are not academic, and I'm not saying they're stupid, they're just not academic, and they would struggle with this stuff, and they'd be like forced into this situation where they'd be like, you're going to be a lawyer, and they're like, I'm not going to be a lawyer. I can't bang two pieces of wood together. And that was a big issue, and the parents would really put pressure on them in that regard. And I found that quite interesting. And so, like, a lot of our message has always been, directed towards those, parents and people that have kids that are not academic, because it's like you say, like in truth, this is probably a bit of a lopsided comment based on the fact that most of the business I associate with the trades, but like some of the most successful business owners that I've ever met are trade business owners. They're plumbers, they're builders, they're whatever. And it's super, super intelligent people.
Which is why I don't even like the word. I think I always struggle even saying the word academic, because it implies, saying someone's non-academic implies they don't necessarily have a level of intelligence, which is not the case, right? I think academia doesn't necessarily equate to intelligence. So I think that's part of the problem. And I think you're right. There is a definite thing, which is probably a parents thing, that most parents, certainly of a generation, do feel like, oh, you should go on to university. That's how you'll you'll do well, whether you know what you want to do or not. Go and get a degree and do these things, and that plays right through to gender, right? So there's been less female trades over the years, and that's probably part of it. From some of the women in trades that I've spoken to, they've said when they initially went back to their parents and said, "Oh, I want to get into a trade," and even their teachers were discouraging because there's this sort of stereotypical view of that world. And so I think it's changing, but it's probably not changing fast enough. That's probably the challenge.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole bunch of issues there. I mean, parents being a big one, obviously, when you're an adolescent or whatever, you're a kid, like they're your biggest influence, right? And so, they're not necessarily trying to give you information to detract you from achieving things, but they're trying to give you information that was relevant to them 30 years ago when they went through the same system. And back then, it was very much you go to school, you go to high school, you get good grades, you go to university, you get a job for some blue collar company, and you work for 40 years, and at the end of it, you get what is it, the dead chook and the gold watch, sort of say thank you. Like, and that generational thing has passed now. Like, I mean, we're a testament. Like, we've hired in the last 2 months, we've hired 10 full-time team members to our agency, and I've not asked a single one of them for their university degree. I couldn't care less. Like, it's just becoming less and less relevant. And of course, there are things that you need to have certifications for, especially if you're a plumber or you're a builder. You've got to be qualified. I'm not saying that, but the point is, like so much of this whole, perception around academia, like I would never hire somebody because they've got a marketing degree. Like, I could not care less, you know what I mean? And I'm a marketing agency. So like, I think like it's a really interesting dynamic, and we're seeing a huge like shift towards people out there these days that are like, well, I'm just going to go and educate myself and learn how to do these things and get practical experience, because that's really what's valuable to, out in the marketplace. It's practical experience.
Yeah. But it's shifting. But the apprenticeship thing, I think, is I think one of the things we kind of wrestle with a little bit as well as trades companies that don't necessarily want to take on an apprentice because of the perceived level of work and investment in doing that. But those that have and that we speak to, when it sort of comes through in the results, it's the best thing they ever did. I mean, of course, you can hire a bad apprentice, like you can any employee. You can get someone that doesn't have the right attitude and doesn't pick it up, whatever else. But I think that's more about how you hire and how you select the right people. But most of what we hear is attitude is the most important thing, right? Having that can-do attitude and all those types of things is really key. But then you help them build the future industry, which is important, because there is this kind of aging out of trades companies or older people that have been in trades companies for a long time, and their experience and knowledge has really been really critical in the growth of the industry. And as that sort of leaves, you do end up having a bit of this gap between the people that don't have as much knowledge. So it's really important to generate that from the grassroots up.
So the couple of things, the first one being that whole conversation around good apprentices versus bad apprentices, good team members versus bad team members. It's very much, and this is something that I literally spent a year working on last year, is taking ownership over that process as a leader, inverted commas, and sort of realizing that it's up to me who I let in, and that really relayed directly into the recruitment process. Yeah. And the whole thing, and we refine this, and we're doing training on this for sure, because it's just an amazing process that we've been able to put together. But like that whole conversation, and I was guilty of this for years, where I would just go on, like, if I would wait till I needed someone and I'd hire basically the first person that could fog a mirror through some shitty ad that I'd put out there. And I realized over time that it just didn't work. You needed to have I needed to have a better process around it, which I spent a lot of time developing. But I mean, I think a lot of the guys out there are in a similar boat where, they do that. They're like, we're going to need more employees next month. Let's go hire some apprentices or whatever. But they don't put them through a process. There's no real qualification or more importantly, disqualification. Like, you can't just take the first person that throws their hand up for an apprentice. Like, you've got to put them through like a qualification process, and you've got to make sure they're the right fit for the company, both culturally and, commitment wise and whatever it might be. And like you said, you hire for attitude. Like, you can bullshit that for a short period of time, but you can also filter that from the beginning, and you can kind of get a really good feel and a really good gauge of what a person's like, if you have a good process around that. And that process takes time. And I think that's the biggest problem. Like, people sort of, they go and hire, they try and do it as quick as possible, which is the wrong way to go about it. You should always be hiring slow and firing fast. I think that's something that a lot of businesses are starting to realize, but they're also starting really struggling with, because it's not obvious, and and if you do it properly, it's a long and, to be honest, kind of painful process.
Yes. Well, I think it's. I agree. I think there's cultural fit's really important. Having a process and deciding what someone needs to how they need to operate within your company is key. And the other thing that we see from the survey, which is important, is just that you do need to plan ahead. If you need to hire someone tomorrow, then you've left it too late. And that's not easy. I'm not suggesting that's easy, but if you have a view of your pipeline of work, you want to be thinking a few months out, right? We're going to need someone, so that you can be selective and think through and spend the time to get the right person into the business. Because
absolutely, and that's
the right person, they stick around, treat them properly, all those things as well.
Sure, and like what you've just said, we call that our forecasted org chart, and we have that. We've got a 12 month, like we know in 12 months what our business is going to look like, and so we can plan for that accordingly. And so we've got this full process in place, so we know we get to this point, we hire this person, and then we don't want to ever be at a point where we're like we can't deliver on work we've taken in because of staff, and like that's a big. And I like drive that home so hard with my managers, and they're on top of it now. Like they've got. I can jump into our recruitment process, and I can see they're recruiting for team members, and I have nothing to do with it, but they're following the schedule and they're following the the forecasted outlook, and they know so it's it does work. But again, it's like what you said, you got to really like look ahead, and you got to really take into consideration what that's going to look like down the track, and then understand what milestones are responsible for getting you to that point by when you bring on that next person, and whatever that person is. It doesn't always have to be an apprentice either. That might be office management. Like if you're trying to remove yourself from doing all the quoting, that's great, but like at what point are you able to do that? What point are you able to bring someone in that can replace you to do those things? So it's just having clarity and transparency over that. And these are the things as well, like going back to what we were saying before, these are not obvious things. Like these are things you don't get taught at TAFE. These are things you typically have to learn through the School of Hard Knocks or get help with also from someone that's done it before. So if you're out there and you're in that boat, like don't feel like you're stupid. Like it is a lot to learn, but there are resources out there that can help you do these things. As your business grows and as you grow as a business owner, your role in your business will change month to month.
Yeah, it's 100%. That's what we see. Most people speak to someone who's a trade owner already. And most trade owners, what's great about the business is even if you're in the same area, people don't compete in that way. They're happy to have a conversation and tell people the mistakes they made and how to get around those. Join a local business network seems to have a lot of power for a lot of people because you can meet other business owners who maybe aren't in trades who can sort of talk to their experience. And then, as you said, there's loads of resources online. We have lots of tools and interview guides and lots of stuff on Tradify as well. So I just urge people to look at that type of stuff so you don't have to do the heavy lifting and reinvent the wheel from scratch.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a really good point. You shouldn't have to reinvent the wheel, but you should certainly have to reshape it. And I found that's a big thing for me over the years. Like, you can read something out of a book or you can listen to something that works for someone. But like I found for me, I need to put my own tweak on it to actually make it work for my business. And that takes time. And, I went through that whole stage for years, in truth, of information paralysis and analysis paralysis, where you sort of just, I was just consuming so much material and not implementing anything. And so I've learned over the last couple of years that like part of that information consumption, there has to be a part of it, which is application. And whatever that looks like, if it's like directly applying something you've learned, or if it's taking something that you've learned and customizing it to suit you, it doesn't matter. But the point is, like, that responsibility is on you as the business owner, and no one's going to do that for you, and no one can do it for you. And like, I had a situation recently with like one of my best mates, and he was coming at me saying, "Oh, I need a better process around, tracking our team's, outcomes and deliverables." And I have that, and I've created it. It's amazing. We use it internally. But I said, there's no point in me just giving this to you because it means nothing to you. You haven't been through the process that I've been through to develop this and the reason why I've done it. And so I sent him a couple of books and I said, go and read these, and then we'll talk about and I'll show you what we've built off the back of it, and you can see how that would apply to you. But the point is, like, you can't. I think this is where so many like coaching programs and things fall over, is because like they're just giving people like template. Here's the system on this, and that's bullshit. Because like that's great as a foundation or something that you can mold, but it's never going to be 100% applicable to your business. You've got to put your tweaks to it.
Yeah. I listen. You got to identify how you work. I laugh wryly because I always see on LinkedIn and all over the place these things about wake up at 4 a.m, have a cold shower, and do all this stuff. And it's like, look, if you need 7 or 8 hours sleep and you don't want to go to bed at 8 p.m. or whatever time it is you need to go to bed to do that, that's never going to work for you. And so I think,
or if you have children,
or if you have children, unless they happen to wake up really, really early. So I just think you're right. You need to put your own personal lens in it and figure out the bits that work for you and then how it will apply to your business for sure.
Like, funnily enough, like all of those, and I laugh as well because I've followed them and I've read those programs and I've even tried some of them. The five. I mean, ironically now, like with kids, you're pretty much up at 5 a.m. anyway. But the point is that you're not up doing work; you're up being a dad or whatever it is. But like underlying with all these programs and things, like basically the key action there is doing the handful of important things that facilitate the best start to your day, and
the rest of the day. Yeah,
I'll give you all a hot tip out there. It's not checking your Facebook and not answering your emails. Like, it's actually doing things that are going to help you move the needle, right? And so there's a whole approach to this in relation to goal setting, which I'm not going to go into. But the point being, like most of these programs, they're designed around, first of all, taking little action points which result in habits. And it's very much, everything is pretty much habit-based. It's a book called The Compound Effect. I don't know if you've read that. I'm reading it again at the moment, but very much focused around, helping you create positive habits. There's another one called Atomic Habits by James Clear. Like, there's some great books out there which really help you learn these things. And like, realistically, when you put these things into practice, it's amazing what you can achieve. And it's that whole 1% mentality. All you need to do is aim at getting 1% better. And the compounding effect of that is
over time.
Absolutely phenomenal. When you take your app, you take Tradify, for example, by implementing one piece of technology, like that might look like a small thing at a glance, but the reality is across the board, you're improving so many parts of your process by percentages that the result is a compound effect, right? So you're minimizing your staff energy output by not having to chase bills. You're mitigating the impact on your team accountability timeline by getting people booked into jobs and assigning people. Like, you're doing all this through one program. You're not having to chase bills. You're getting paid on time, so you're reducing your accounting. Like all this kind of stuff, right? And it's done through one thing. And like, this is what people need to understand. It's not like, and people like will argue, or they'll say, "Oh, it's the program's expensive" or whatever, without having any perception of what it's actually costing them at the moment without it. Putting all these
I think we don't tend to hear that so much. If we hear anything, it's if you are transitioning from an older system, and that might, when I say older system, I mean like spreadsheets or worse, pen and paper. Initially, the level of investment required might seem high for the first couple of weeks, right? To learn the system, integrate into how you do things. It's very easy to go back to. I can remember this in the days where we transitioned from paper, dare I say it, Filofax and paper diaries to Outlook, and it wasn't called Outlook then, but to, Lotus Notes, whatever you want to call it, to calendars that were online. And so what you had people doing in the early days was saying, well, I'm a bit nervous about this online thing, so I'm going to write it down in the paper and I'm going to record it in the calendar just in case the calendar crashes. And in the early days it did, right? But now with cloud-based systems, that's not going to happen. And so I think that initial investment is worthwhile. And it's, again, to your point, it's just a habit-changing thing. And, whether it's 4 a.m. start or whatever it is that it looks like, initially they might feel painful, but over time, you'll see the benefits. And so it's definitely a worthwhile investment. Whether it's Tradify or another system, you definitely want a system to do that stuff for you.
Yeah, sure. And especially certainly for managing jobs, but there's systems for everything, and if there's not, systems don't always have to be technology either. Like there's,
right.
like a lot of what we do day to day is a system or a habit that we've developed. And, like, take, for example, we have this system around putting our kids to bed, right? Which we've never documented, and it's not like you can't go and read it anywhere, but it's something that my wife and I have done. Now, we didn't realize until we went away with friends and we saw the way they put their kids to bed, that the way we do it is terrible. And so we changed it. And change was not easy. It was hard. Like, we had to go and help get like a sleep consultant to help us do things because it was taking up too much time, blah, blah, blah. And so, like, the point being, unless you're getting exposure to other ways of doing things, and of course we're preaching to the choir here because people are watching this or listening to this and they're out there looking for that information. But the point is, there's very likely a better way of doing something. And
there always is.
Yeah. And the problem is, as we get older ourselves and as our business get more established, you get stuck in these routines of doing things and that whole mentality around, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And like, you and I both know the greatest enemy of of great is good. If something's working well, then why try and improve it? But
I always say it to our new employees. I'm like, we want to hear all the things that you think we should be doing differently in your first few weeks. And they're kind of like, oh, why is it so important? And I don't want to be negative. I'm like, no, it's not negative. It's constructive. Be constructive about how you deliver the feedback, but It's the most important time, because after 3-4 weeks, you then become embedded in our system. To your point, you would call it the system, the way we do things. And I want you to call out when you're fresh with fresh eyes the things that we could do better. And it's really powerful. So I would urge trade companies to think exactly the same way. We often hear how they hire apprentices or new people into the company that have come from another company that has a system, whether it's software or otherwise, and use those people to help you get on board with it, for sure.
I mean, there's nothing more valuable than honest feedback. Like so many business owners, like one of my good mates, for example, runs this great glazier business, and he's like, he cannot, for the life of him, get his head around why you would want to ask a client if they've had a good experience. And I'm like, what are you so afraid of? He just wants to hear good things, and I'm like, you're never going to grow. And he hasn't grown in 10 years. He has not grown one bit, because there's no, so stubborn, in the wake of how he's doing things, and so such a refusal to take feedback on, better ways of doing something.
Right.
What do you know? Like, that's kind of mentality. You don't understand my business. I mean, you hear it a million times, I'm sure. But the point being, you've got to be receptive to feedback, and you've got to have to your point, you've got to have a constructive process in your business on how to obtain the real feedback. Because especially when you're talking to team members, because especially if they're new, they're not going to want to be negative, and they don't want to be seen, they don't want to be outcast, or they don't want to run. So you've got to have a really good way of getting the truth out of them. And it's something we've developed over the years, and it works great now. We've got some internal surveys and things that go out to them, and it's we don't know who submitted it, basically. So. And I'll make that transparent. I'm like, I don't care what you think I want to hear. I want to know what I need to hear to make this better, a better experience. So anyway, it's all part of it.
I completely agree. We have a Facebook group of our customers. We have a survey that goes out, and we get good comments and we get some negative ones. And it's the negative ones are the ones I probably spend more time. I really appreciate the positive comments. They're reaffirming, and we're doing all the right things. And I love seeing those comments. But the negative ones are the ones I probably spend the most time on. To understand, is it something we're aware of, not aware of, what should we do about it? And we take those things seriously. And I agree with you. There is always that initial kind of gut reaction, which is like, when you see that, but it's really powerful stuff, and you should embrace it, because you won't improve otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mate, this has been great. We better wrap this up, I suppose, before we get to work. But mate, thanks for the recap. And again, thanks for putting these reports together. They're great. Where can people get these reports, by the way?
Yeah, so we'll give you the link. It's sort of Tradify HQ. I think it's /the Pulse, but I'll send you you can put it in the episode notes, the actual report, and it'll be online fairly soon. And you can access the report based on the country you're in. And you can look at other countries if you want, but that'll come out fairly soon.
Great. Okay. Lovely. Well,
fantastic.
That's a wrap, listeners. We will, if you've got any questions for Michael, or if you've got any feedback in relation to what you've heard in this podcast, let us know. Head across to tradifyhq.com. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah. And you'll be able to link to the new report. And I'm pretty sure we've got some offer as well for you guys through the site shed. I think it's a 50% off onboarding or something for 3 months.
Correct.
So I'll put some links to that in the show notes as well. All right, that's a wrap. Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, Michael, great to talk to you again. See you soon. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Toolbox Talks. If you're liking what you hear, then you can head across to the siteshed.com, where you can join our community by signing up to our Toolbox Talks. You'll get sent a weekly notification, which is basically a highlight of everything that we've spoken about during that week, along with any other industry news that may be relevant or specific to the trades. If you're enjoying the show, you can head across to iTunes, Stitcher, or SoundCloud, where you can leave us a review. That would be fantastic, and all the reviews get read out in the show. Likewise, if you have any friends or colleagues that you think would benefit from the show and the episodes that we create, then please go ahead and share it with them.